Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. Long before the first snowfall, before fear had a name, before I understood how someone could slip through the cracks of a normal life without anyone noticing, everything felt simple. I grew up in Snow-Lined Pines, Washington, a town so small you could ride across it on a bike in 15 minutes. People left their doors unlocked. Kids walked home even after dark. And strangers were not really strangers, just neighbors you had not met yet. Or at least that was what we kept telling ourselves. My sister Emily and I lived with our parents in a cedar plank house tucked beside the woods. The backyard blended immediately into towering Douglas firs like a curtain that never fully closed. I used to love that forest. I used to think of it as a huge old friend sitting silently behind our house. Back then, the worst thing that could be hiding out there was the occasional black bear or some raccoon digging through the trash. But that was before August, before the heat wave, before the signs we did not know how to read. I did not know it at the time, but everything started that night. Emily came into my room while I was practicing guitar. She pushed the door open gently, her eyes wide and her voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone outside my window," she whispered. I stopped in the middle of a chord. A raccoon, maybe a deer. It didn't sound like that. The way she insisted made my skin crawl. She was not dramatic. Emily did not get scared by shadows the way I sometimes did. So we grabbed flashlights and went outside. The night smelled like warm cedar and dust. Her window faced the woods, where the ground was covered in dry needles. Just stepping on that layer made a sharp crunching sound. We shined our lights into the trees. Nothing. Then we heard movement. A heavy dragging sound heading deeper between the trunks. Too fast for a deer. Too heavy for a raccoon. My stomach tightened. "It's probably just an animal," I said, though I did not fully believe it myself. She nodded but kept looking over her shoulder as we went back inside. I should have taken her more seriously. By October, storms were coming so often we barely saw the sun. Branches snapped every night. Dad said it was wind damage, but sometimes the breaking sounded too deliberate, too close to the fence. One time I woke up at 2 a.m. to a crack so loud I sat straight up in bed. When I looked outside, the motion light by the garage flicked on, flooding the driveway with brightness, completely empty. After that, I could not go back to sleep. At the beginning of November, the first real snowfall came down, silent, thick, untouched. I went on my usual walk through the woods, convinced the fresh snow would calm me down. I climbed my favorite Douglas fir, looked over the clearing, and froze. Track after track, deep, spaced like long, careful strides. They started near the old logging road and continued toward our house. They stopped right at the rusted wire fence behind the yard. On our side of the property, beyond the fence, the snow was completely untouched. I crouched down to look at them more closely. The pattern did not match any boot I recognized, and it was not from any local animal either. I told myself it had to be a hunter, someone cutting through the area. That lie kept me sane more or less for a month. December always brought family to our house, cousins, aunts, uncles. Everybody packed into the living room telling loud stories and drinking too much hot chocolate. That year they stayed in the basement. I was up late playing video games with headphones on, lost in virtual worlds, when frantic pounding on the stairs jolted me and made me spin around in my chair. My uncle came rushing upstairs carrying his little boy, his face pale as a ghost. "There's someone outside our window," he gasped. "A man, staring at us." The house exploded. Flashlights came on. People shouted. Everything turned into chaos. But by the time they got to the basement window, whoever had been there was already gone. My aunt insisted he had just dreamed it. stress, too much wine, any excuse that might calm his nerves. Still, the next morning when I stepped out into the frozen yard beside the basement, I saw it, the imprint of a sneaker toe in the snow, just one directly beneath the window. I never argued with my uncle again. That night I tried to sleep in my room, but the house felt different, heavy, as if it were inhaling and never exhaling. I unplugged the Christmas lights, pulled the covers all the way up, and squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to fall asleep. Then I heard it, one sharp pluck of a guitar string from the garage. Then something tipped over. A faint rattling sound, but unmistakably real. It sounded like someone was testing the instrument, like someone wanted to see if we were awake. I did not move. I did not breathe. My mind was racing. Had I closed the garage? Dad always closed it. Always. But then a soft whimper came from Emily's room, barely audible. That broke me. I grabbed my phone, a flashlight, and the aluminum bat Dad kept behind the door. My hands were shaking so badly the beam of light wobbled across the walls as I moved down the hallway. I pushed open Emily's bedroom door. She was sitting on the bed, clutching her blanket. "He came back," she whispered. I did not ask how she knew. Some fears do not need an explanation. The next morning, everything came together like a blow. The open door in September, the night Dad went through the house with a knife, the sound of footsteps outside Emily's window, the snapping branches, the tracks, the basement window. Whatever had been circling us was not random. Someone had been coming onto our property for months, watching us, getting a little closer every time. Snowline Pines was remote enough that someone could hide in the woods for days without being found. Maybe he lived out there. Maybe he camped near the logging road. Maybe he knew our routines better than we did. And maybe he had no intention of stopping. During the following week, I barely slept. Every night I watched the tree line from my window. Sometimes the woods looked normal, but on other nights something moved in the dark. A figure, a shadow, the suggestion of motion. Always too far away to make out clearly. Always enough to make my pulse jump. My parents did not fully believe me. They said we were working ourselves up, even though they still checked every lock twice. One night in mid-December, I woke up to a sound I will never forget. Breathing. It was not mine. It was right outside my window, slow, heavy, as if it were almost fogging the glass. I could not see anything through the curtains, and I did not dare pull them back. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was out there might hear it. Then I felt a soft scraping sound, fingers dragging along the outer siding of the house. A deliberate glide as if he were looking for weak points. I stayed perfectly still until morning. The next morning, Dad and I went outside carefully. Beneath my window, we found footprints, deep ones facing the house. The snow was disturbed right where someone had shifted their weight, coming far too close. From that moment on, Dad did not doubt it anymore. We installed extra lights, checked the property line, and reported everything to the sheriff. He promised patrols, but out here that only meant they might drive by once every few nights if we were lucky. It was not enough. One evening close to Christmas, while my parents were at town hall and Emily had gone to a friend's house, I was home alone. I sat in the living room pretending to watch TV, listening to every creak. Around 9 p.m., the light flickered and went out. The house dropped into total darkness. I froze. Outside, the forest felt alive, silent, too silent. A branch snapped, then another step, and then 3 more, slower, carefully approaching the back door. I held my breath. My whole world narrowed to the space between me and whoever was outside. Then suddenly, headlights swept across the driveway. My parents had come home early. The footsteps fled at once, crashing through the underbrush with alarming speed. By the time Dad reached the backyard with a flashlight, whoever had been there had already been swallowed by the endless woods. We never saw him clearly. Not his face, not his clothes. Nothing that proved what we knew. But early the next morning, fresh snow fell again. When I went outside, I saw them, footprints by the fence. The same long, deliberate strides coming from the logging road to the edge of the yard. And this time, there were handprints on the wire fence. He had tried to climb it. He almost made it. That winter, we reinforced everything. Dad put up trail cameras, motion sensor lights, and alarms. When spring came, the visits stopped. Or at least we stopped finding signs. But ever since then, every December on the first snowy morning, I walk to the fence and check the ground. Sometimes there is nothing but wind-dragged drifts. Sometimes I see deer or rabbit tracks. But one year when I was 20 and came home from college, I found a single human footprint in the snow. Just one facing the house. I do not think he ever completely left. I think he waits, watches maybe from farther away now, or maybe not. I am still afraid of winter. I am still afraid of the woods. But more than anything, I am terrified by the idea that you can live your whole life thinking you are alone out there, when in reality someone was always just a few trees away, waiting for the right moment to let themselves be seen. Even in places that seem the safest, trust your instincts. Ignoring small signs allows danger to grow in silence, and taking your fears seriously, even when it seems irrational, may be exactly what protects you and the people you love. Story 2. I used to believe the city delivered on what it promised. I would finish work, close my laptop, walk 3 blocks, and Ridgewood Park would absorb the frustration I carried, dissolving it into a cool night that smelled like cedar. I had a routine, walks at 9:30 p.m., headphones tucked away, the kind of silence that feels like a private room. For years it worked. I left the corporate world and still kept those walks, because they were the only thing that felt truly mine. Then things started to change, in small details that slipped past me without notice, until I could not ignore them anymore. That September felt thin, like a poorly printed page. Strange things began appearing around the park. A torn jacket abandoned on a bench, a half-hidden tent where the trail narrowed, odd scratches on the safety railings that someone joked were urban art. I saw them and shrugged. Seattle had always had its share of weirdness. The first night I truly felt watched. I was not even thinking about any of that. I had just left the office, my heart still buzzing from a meeting that had gone badly. As I passed the tallest cedar tree, something caught my eye. A hooded figure hunched over on the bench. He did not look at me. He did not move. He sat like a statue made for the shadows. "Good evening," I said, more out of politeness than anything else. No response, not even a blink. The dimness of the park seemed to cling to him like oil. I kept walking because what else do you do when a stranger occupies a bench? You continue with your life, trying not to be the weird one. Halfway down the path, I heard footsteps behind me, measured, matching my pace with the precision of a metronome. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I walked. They resumed. I forced myself to believe it was another night walker, someone using the park as a pressure valve. I pretended to talk on the phone, saying loud, casual phrases about a friend waiting for me in Mercer. Even so, the footsteps stayed with me. "Hello," I tried, turning my head slightly. No answer. The air felt thin, like something was missing from it. I sped up. The footsteps did too. The first time I ran felt ridiculous, like an adrenaline surge from a childhood game. The second time I ran because I imagined every possible outcome, and none of them were good. When I reached the exit, I looked back and saw him, the figure standing at the edge of the trees, hood up, his face a black absence. He did not move. He did not follow. He only watched until I turned the corner and swallowed the safety of the streetlights. The warning carved into the bench, "Don't look back," hit me like a punch. The letters were fresh. Splinters of wood lay beside them as if someone had dropped a scalp. I took a picture of it because what else do people do with a phone? Store evidence for later. A shield against the uncomfortable idea that maybe you are losing your grip on normal. I repeated every reasonable explanation to myself. Kids vandalizing, some joker with a knife and a twisted sense of humor. Still, the bench under the cedar remained there like a visible bruise. The days turned into an inventory of small disturbances. A car I did not recognize parked outside my building longer than seemed logical. A shadow that appeared to have settled near the mailbox. I began adjusting small habits, coming back by a different street, checking the locks twice, leaving the lamp on longer than necessary. Paranoia is a thief. It steals that easy confidence you used to wear like a coat. Then came the security footage. I reviewed a full week and saw nothing. Static nights of empty sidewalks and squirrels. But at 2:17 a.m., the sensor triggered and the screen went black. Not night dark, not the normal darkness of exposure. Truly black, as if someone had placed a hand over the lens, close enough to touch the door, close enough to know exactly where the camera pointed. A second later, the frame returned, and there was nothing. No footsteps, no retreat, as if someone had inhaled the night and carefully folded it behind themselves. I called the police. They took the report with that polite seriousness bureaucracies pull from the drawer when something sits exactly between routine and crisis. Recorded, filed, and ultimately not prioritized. "Keep the footage," the officer said. "If anything happens, call again." It was the correct answer delivered in the wrong tone. I saved the file on a backup drive and pretended that would be enough. The photo that transformed fear into something new was not on the security cameras. It was on my own camera roll, wedged between a wide shot of a waterfall and a close-up of moss. I was editing photos from a hike, adjusting color and contrast, when an image appeared that I had never taken. A blurry, grainy photo. Someone outside my living room window, wearing a hoodie, their head tilted, their face an indistinct smear because the glass had turned the flash into a blinding glare. But the angle. God, the angle. It was from inside, inches from the glass. I froze, my breathing suddenly too loud, listening to the hum of the refrigerator as if it were lying. I locked the doors, grabbed the heaviest tripod I had, and sat in the dark like a sentry. Minutes stretched wide and then broke. Nothing happened. When the officers returned, they were sympathetic but practical. "There are no signs, no forced entry," they said. "Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe." Their theories were built to support a normal life, but the edges did not fit. I knew my house. I knew where my camera was kept. That photo had been taken from inside. In the reflection on the window, you could see a fragment of my hallway, the corner of my rug. Someone had been there, close enough to distinguish the fibers of my curtains. I stopped sleeping well. I dreamed about hallways saturated with the smell of cedar, always turning toward a bench with a hooded silhouette. Daylight only offered brief relief. I moved my desk away from the windows as if relocating a defensive line. I installed more cameras with angles that made me feel ridiculous and protected at the same time. I bought a doorbell with better resolution than half my devices. It did not empty the nights. It only recorded them. The second sighting at the edge of the neighborhood, where the park's trees met the suburban yards, happened during a morning run. I was trying to reclaim the space, to run without fear. There he was again, half in shadow, half in light, watching the path like a statue that had learned to breathe. This time he was not inside the park. He stood at the tree line, positioned as if he had been waiting for me. My legs kept moving, and somehow that small action felt enormous. "Hey," I called, with the kind of voice that accepts the possibility of nothing but asks anyway. Nothing. No response. He remained a shape that refused to become human in any readable way. I passed him, breathing loudly and absurdly. When I looked back, he was still there, unmoving. A witness. Not moving toward me, not stepping away. Simply present. I thought about confronting him, about walking straight toward him and talking until a face emerged beneath the hood with an answer that made sense. But that would have been a story of bravery written in the wrong ink. Instead, I ran. The practical cowardice of self-preservation. The only courage I had left. When I told a friend, she suggested moving, changing my routine, filing for a restraining order. She spoke with sincerity, the way people do before they understand how fleeting evidence can be. I saved the photos, saved the video, and called the police again and again. The response was always the same. Document it. Keep everything. Call if anything changes. Time does something strange to fear. Either it wears it down until it leaves you hollow, or it plants a seed that grows roots and small, persistent shoots of caution. For months, I adjusted the details that mattered. I walked during the day. At night, I kept the curtains closed. I began noticing cars and faces with a new cataloging eye. I learned the faces of the neighbors on my block. I traded night skyline views for early mornings and midday errands. Weeks passed without a close encounter, and my shoulders relaxed a little. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, I found another fresh scratch on a park bench near the cedar tree. This time it was not a funny phrase or an ironic message. It was a single deep line carved with a steady hand, dark. A tally mark, 1. It looked like an accusation. I took a photo, archived it with the others, and went back to the police station. This time, the officer who spoke with me took the time to ask questions that sounded like one person worrying about another. "Would you like us to do a welfare check?" he asked. "We can increase patrols for a while." I said yes, because yes is a word that can turn into movement. They coordinated with officers in the sector. For several nights, I saw patrol cars moving through the park. Their presence was a balm, like someone turning on a light in a dark room. For a while, I felt clarity returning. I slept better. I walked earlier. I allowed myself to imagine the hooded figure as a prankster who had grown bored. Then the patrols decreased. Budgets change. Priorities tangle. And the nights return to the old silence of the park. I never saw him again. Not in the park. Not at the window. Not at the tree line. Still, sometimes late at night, I glance over my shoulder when a bench appears in the corner of my vision. I still check the camera angles as if the mounting might have loosened when I was not looking. But life insists on being lived, and I chose to live it. The lesson is not that fear disappears if you rearrange your life. Fear reshapes itself around you until you decide whether to let it rule you or turn it into a teacher. Vigilance is not cowardice. Setting boundaries is not paranoia. When the world gives you a reason to be careful, when someone follows your steps, watches your windows, or leaves messages carved in public places, believe those small truths before they become enormous. Protect your routines. Document the intrusions. Ask for help, because courage takes many forms. Calling the police, changing your path, refusing to let silence be your only companion. Story 3. I used to believe Halloween fear was pure theater, that anything unsettling in a quiet neighborhood like Ashwater Ridge had to be staged. Fog machines, plastic skeletons, speakers on porches, cheap haunted house soundtracks whistling on a loop. I thought real danger lived far away, in places where people left windows open in bad neighborhoods or trusted strangers too easily. I never imagined it could show up in a cul-de-sac where kids learn to ride bikes and neighbors lend each other garden tools. But fear doesn't need a big city. It only needs one person watching you for the wrong reasons. Over time, I realized the first sign was so simple, I barely registered it. A stranger saying he liked my Halloween ghost. I had hung that decoration on a whim. A white sheet with black fabric eyes tied to a branch of the maple tree in my yard. It was a joke, really. But that year, in late October of 2019. Someone knocked on my door on a Wednesday morning right when I had the day off. A man in his mid-40s stood on the doorstep. A few days' worth of beard, short brown hair, a cheap puffer jacket, and his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He smiled as if he knew me. "I love the ghost," he said, tilting his head a little too far. "Really clever." "It's just a sheet," I replied, forcing a smile. "But thanks." He nodded slowly. His eyes slid past my shoulder toward the hallway inside my house before he finally turned and walked away. It felt strange, yes, but not enough to worry me. Ashwater Ridge had plenty of characters. People who overshared in grocery store aisles or greeted you with too much enthusiasm during the morning walks. I let it go. 3 days later, he came back. I had just gotten home from an extremely long shift at the cafe, still wearing my apron and name tag. He knocked softly and rocked on his heels with the same smile. "The ghost still looks great," he commented. "Do you live here alone?" I didn't answer that. I pretended I hadn't heard the question. "Have a good night," I said, and closed the door while he kept talking. Through the peephole, I watched him stand on the porch for a full minute, shoulders slumped as if he had expected a different reaction. Halloween arrived. Kids ran across the lawns. Parents chattered in driveways. Porch lights flickered orange. When I stepped outside after handing out candy, I saw him again, across the street under the weak glow of a street lamp, simply standing there, watching. I told myself not to be paranoid, not on Halloween, not when all the adults in the neighborhood were outside. But unease crept up my spine like something cold and deliberate. Near midnight, when the street had emptied and porch lights were shutting off one by one, another knock sounded at the door. I looked through the peephole. It was him. He held a small box with both hands and tapped the lid with his thumb, as if waiting for me to open the door. "What do you want?" I muttered to myself without moving. He didn't speak. He didn't change posture. He simply waited. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. By the time the operator answered, he had already turned and walked away. The police searched the street. Nothing. The man had vanished. The box was gone too. There were no footprints, no distant headlights. Nothing. For months after that, everything returned to normal. Winter passed, spring came and went. By October 2020, the incident had become a strange memory buried beneath work shifts, bills, and weekend painting projects. That year, I didn't hang any decorations. The ghost stayed packed away in a box in the garage. I had almost convinced myself the man was just a lonely neighbor who had misread social signals. But one cold night in November, everything changed. I came home late after closing the cafe. I ate dinner, opened an energy drink, and logged onto a gaming server with some friends. It was an ordinary quiet night, the kind that slips by without leaving a mark. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered, assuming it was work. Nothing. No voice. Just wind. "Hello?" I repeated. Silence. The call disconnected. Then another came, and another, and another. After the fourth call, I blocked the number. Seconds later, a message arrived. A single photo. It was me sitting at my desk, taken from outside the living room window through the glass behind me. The grainy glow of my lamp outlined my silhouette perfectly. My hair tied up in a messy bun. The timestamp read 29 seconds ago. My breath stopped. I spun around in my chair, expecting to see a face pressed against the window. There was nothing. Only darkness. I grabbed the first thing I could use as a weapon, a wooden easel I kept near the dining room, and searched the house. Every room, every corner. I kept whispering to myself, "It's okay. It's okay. It's okay." Even though I knew it wasn't. When I reached the front entrance, I saw it. The door was open. Just an inch, but open. I always locked it. It was habit, routine. I never forgot. Something icy tore through my chest. Then I heard footsteps. Inside, soft, slow, moving down the hallway. I pressed my back against the kitchen wall and dialed 911, whispering my address between shaky breaths. The footsteps reached the door of my bedroom. The knob turned carefully, without shaking, just a slow pressure testing it. Then the steps moved again, back toward the living room. No hurry, no fear. More like someone taking a small tour through a place they already knew. I stayed crouched in a corner until officers arrived, pounding on the door and shouting my name. They searched the house, closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain, even the attic hatch. "It doesn't look like anyone was here," one of them said. "No signs of forced entry. You probably heard the house settling." But my house never settled by opening its own door. The truth hit me with nauseating certainty. He hadn't forced entry. He didn't need to. He already knew how to get inside. In the days that followed, I changed the locks, installed cameras, reinforced the back door, and tried to sleep with a light on. Still, the shadows felt wrong. Every creak made me sit up in bed. A month passed in silence, then another. Eventually, I stopped checking the cameras every time a leaf crossed the porch. A friend told me he was gone now. Maybe he had moved away. Maybe he was just a passing stranger. I pretended to believe her. Then October 2021 arrived. Fog settled thick over Ash Ridge, the kind that makes streetlights glow like dying stars. Kids hung plastic skeletons. Neighbors inflated giant pumpkins. I decorated nothing. I couldn't. I didn't want to draw attention. A week before Halloween, I was taking out the trash when I saw a shape near the corner of the street, right where the light didn't quite reach. A motionless figure, watching. I froze halfway through a step. My porch light flickered behind me. The figure didn't move. I whispered to myself, "It's just the fog playing tricks on your eyes." But part of me already knew the truth. It was him, or someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I carried the trash to the curb without looking back. When I returned to the porch, I couldn't help it. I turned around. He was gone. 2 days later, while I was at work, my camera sent a notification. Motion detected front yard. I opened the video. A man wearing a puffer jacket with the hood up walked slowly to the base of my maple tree. He lifted his hand and touched the hook where the ghost used to hang. Just brushed it with his fingers. Then he stepped closer to the camera. Too close. His face wasn't fully visible, just the patchy beard, tired eyes, and that familiar crooked smile. He murmured something. The microphone barely picked up 2 words. "I missed you." Then he walked away. The police patrolled the street for a week. Neighbors left porch lights on. My parents begged me to stay at their house for a while. But I didn't want him dictating my life, so I stayed. Watching. Waiting. That year, 2022, Halloween came and went without incident. No knocks at the door, no photos, no calls. The camera stayed empty. My friend said that meant the nightmare was over. But the nights in Ashwater Ridge have a way of holding their breath. And sometimes near midnight, when the fog climbs up from the ravine, I can see a figure beside the street lamp. Too still to be a trick of the light, too comfortable inside the darkness. He never came closer again. And that's exactly what scares me. People like him don't forget doors they've already opened. They don't lose interest. They wait until you believe the story is over, until you remove the locks from your mind. Then they come looking again. And the most terrifying part is this. He didn't want the ghost decoration. He wanted the person who hung it. Trust your instincts, even when danger seems small or unlikely. The tiniest signals can be warnings of something much larger, and paying attention to them may be the only thing that keeps you safe. Story 4. I used to think the road was something honest, that all you had to do was show up, start the car, and it would take you somewhere that made sense. After dropping out of college, Evan and I used to drive to keep those small, bright pieces of life alive. Roadside cafes with bad coffee, back roads with better views. Those nights when the map was optional and the radio was barely a suggestion. Those drives filled the hours between a paycheck and meaning. That night in October changed forever the way I think about maps, fog, and those strange places the world hides in silence. Evan loved to say, "Let's go where the GPS gets confused." He said it like it was a challenge and an invitation at the same time. He was the one with the smile that smelled like trouble and the hands that drove us straight toward any kind of mess flirting with the asphalt. I was the one who laughed too loudly and passed the snacks. We were 23 and convinced nothing could surprise us anymore. You become reckless when the future is a blank page. The sign was an old board nailed crookedly to a post. Harper's Edge, 14 miles. The paint was peeling. The arrow pointed toward a road the trees seemed to swallow whole. We joked about cult towns and movie settings. The fog had come down early that night, the kind that turns headlights into halos and makes you feel like you're driving inside a photograph. We didn't pass a single car. No radio station lasted more than one song. The trees formed a wall, and the road narrowed until the pavement barely clung to the dirt. When we rounded the curve and entered Harper's Edge, it felt like the air had been emptied all at once. The streetlights were dead or barely glowing, weak and sickly. The storefronts were boarded up, but some windows still had curtains hanging in them, as if someone had closed for the night and never opened again. The porches shrank into the darkness. Only one house had a lamp on, a thin warmth, almost absurd against the blank whiteness of the town. We stopped at the gas station because it was the only thing that seemed logical. When we stepped inside, the bell over the door let out a lonely chime that bounced off of shelves of stale candy. Behind the counter stood an older man with yellowed teeth, wearing a jacket with a patch where a name should have been. His hands shook when he reached toward the cash register. He looked at us with narrowed eyes, as if he had been expecting someone else. "You're not from here," he said in a paper-thin voice. "No," Evan answered easily, trying to sound cocky. "Just passing through." The man didn't wait for us to ask anything. "You shouldn't be on these roads after dark." He leaned in as if he were about to tell us a secret, and then seemed to pull back, as if the truth weighed more than he deserved to carry. "The people here, they don't want strangers, and not all the ones who live here are alive." He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a horrible fact. We paid in cash like scolded children, bought coffee that tasted like metal, and left with a sudden, stupid urgency. Across the street, figures stood framed in the windows of the houses, silhouettes trapped between the curtains, motionless. They looked like mannequins, until you noticed mannequins don't hunch like humans do. They don't sit and wait with that patient attention, that kind of patience that watches. "Don't look," Evan whispered. "Get in." We left Harper's Edge with fog so thick my hands felt like they were stuffed with cotton. As the town shrank behind us, shapes began to appear along the tree line. One, then two, then a whole row of them facing the road. Statues made of flesh. They didn't move when we sped past. That stillness was worse than being chased. It felt like being watched. Back home, the world kept turning. At the cafe, coffee beans still needed grinding. Bills waited in neat stacks, and the news said nothing about Harper's Edge. But the night left a residue. Evan's voice changed when we drove again. He stared into the rearview mirror long after passing highway checkpoints, and sometimes jerked the wheel at a shadow that wasn't there. A week later, he texted me at 3 o'clock in the morning. "There's someone outside my window." He swore he had seen a figure across the street, its head tilted the wrong way. The police came, took notes the way they do for neighborhood nuisances, and left apologizing for finding nothing. "Maybe some kids," they said. "Maybe someone walking a dog." Evan didn't sleep. He sold his old truck and started sleeping at his parents' house in Montana because he no longer wanted to be alone with the dark. Then one morning I found footprints on my porch, bare feet, mud stamped across the welcome mat. A crude human gesture, the kind that should leave a trail, but didn't. It was just a pattern of marks, isolated, as if someone had stepped up, looked around and decided not to continue. I lived in a neighborhood full of daylight and people walking dogs. My neighbors were the kind who learned your car and your dog's name. No one saw anyone on my porch. No one heard anything that night. The 3 a.m. calls started after that. Unknown numbers. On the other end, nothing but breathing, or a click. One night the phone vibrated and I answered, because curiosity is a terrible animal when you don't keep it leashed. A hiss slipped into the receiver, and then silence. I hung up with a shaking hand and told myself it was a prank. But pranks don't feel like footprints. Curiosity turned into investigation in the most stubborn and foolish way. I opened maps, searched municipal records. Harper's Edge had no online presence except for an old postcard someone had scanned. On Google Maps, the town either didn't exist, or it was an empty marker in an incomplete database. No data available, the message said, like a polite shrug. The satellite images showed forest where the houses should have been. It was the kind of answer that tightens your stomach. Either the world had erased that place, or that place was never supposed to be visible. I tried to understand it like a puzzle. There are towns that die. Ghost towns with rusted signs, corroded gas pumps, and local legends. And there are other places you can reach and feel the error in your bones. Harper's Edge demanded a different language, one that makes your tongue clumsy when you try to name it. I saved photos and numbers in a log, because that's what people do when they're trying to prove something to themselves. I called the sheriff more than once. They were patient, in the way bureaucracy can be, until patience thins out and your concerns become anecdotal. "If you see anything again, call," an officer told me one afternoon. The phrase was a loop. We both knew it, and neither of us expected it to truly help. The fog came back one early morning during a drive through Snoqualmie Pass. I was alone trying to test myself, not by returning to Harper's Edge, but by seeing whether the memory still tightened my fingers around the wheel. The trees blurred into a darker gray, and for one breathless second I thought I saw a silhouette on the side of the road, its head tilted. I blinked, and there was nothing. The rational part said, exhaustion. The other part said, be grateful you didn't really see anything. Even so, Harper's Edge stayed in my rearview mirror like a stain. It was as if the town had leaked out of the mountains and into the way people behaved. The month Evan stopped answering calls. The nights I left the porch light on until dawn. The neighbor who started carrying a flashlight on his evening walks. Maybe it was contagious. Fear feeds fear. But it felt different from that vague, spreading kind. The fear of Harper's Edge had a precise, heavy quality, like a stone you throw that somehow ends up bouncing back to your feet. One Saturday, I met Ethan at a diner. He was a guy who had grown up near the highway, where signs point to places with names that mean history and consequences. He believed two things about remote towns. Most of them were boring, and if something was truly wrong, you kept your keys in your hand. He told me stories about people who lived in houses with boarded-up windows because they liked the quiet. People who learned to respect boundaries, their land and their doors. He said to me, places that don't show up on maps sometimes don't want to be found. He didn't say it like a myth. He said it like common sense. It's strange to decide that a town is gone. You mourn the idea of something you barely had time to name. Harper's Edge stopped being a place and became a state of mind in my life, something that came back like a cough. Evan left. He called once from Montana. He said he had dreamed that the town's windows were blinking in time with a clock. He sounded like someone who had been driving with the headlights off and finally realized the battery was dead. I kept driving, but I took fewer risks. I traded night routes for daytime walks, for diner trips under midday light. Sometimes I still see a figure in the fog when I drive through Snoqualmie Pass. A still silhouette, like someone waiting for a bus that only goes to ruined towns. My hands tighten and then I force myself to breathe. The world is usually ordinary, and yet there is a crack in it that is not. I learned to respect that crack the way you respect thin ice. Beautiful to look at, dangerous to test. I never got closure. There is no clean ending where the town recovers or the figures are explained. I only have a handful of photos, a few messages, and the taste of coffee from a station with a bell that sounded like a funeral knell. I have a friend who moved far away and a life that insists on normal days. But every time the fog rolls in and the trees lean close to the road, the memory stretches, wakes up, and I check the shoulder. The lesson is not to stop exploring or to turn your back on curiosity. It is to respect the small warnings your surroundings give you and act before they become larger. There are places and decisions that demand caution, not because the world is full of monsters, but because our safety often depends on small choices. Turning around, leaving before sunset, listening when an older person warns you. Maps and GPS make us feel like the world is domesticated. Sometimes it isn't, and the wisest kind of courage is knowing when to walk away. Story 5. I used to believe panic arrived in predictable waves, a tight throat, short breath. The world shrinking until even the hum of the refrigerator sounded like thunder. After the fall on the Huckleberry Ridge Trail last October, I learned that panic can be a passenger you never invited, and still have to drive home. The impact left me with a bruise that did not heal in any physical sense. It stayed there, beneath my ribs, steadily undermining my confidence. I had been studying photography for 3 years, obsessed with edges and light, and suddenly the cliff edges in my head became too real. The idea of being alone on a steep trail was enough to coil itself around me for days. So when Professor Nuon assigned an autumn session at Ferglin Orchard, a rustic place, atmospheric, and said, "Perfect for narrative portraits," I agreed before my brain could warn me not to. I was not trying to prove anything dramatic. I just wanted to learn how to breathe again while holding a camera. My classmates Maya, Curtis, and Ben had practical reasons and gentle shoulders. Maya had a laugh that could cut through my tension like sunlight. Curtis liked scouting locations with the studious precision of a botanist. Ben drove and carried extra batteries. None of them knew about the nights when I woke up with the image of my boot slipping off moss into nothing. I swallowed that truth the same way I swallowed coffee. Small sips until it stopped burning. The drive to Ferglin felt like an extension of the assignment. Mist stayed low in the valleys, and Mount Hood was a slow silhouette, half hidden behind clouds. The rental car skidded once on gravel as we turned into the orchard entrance, and Curtis muttered a curse under his breath, gripping the wheel. "Sorry," he said, even though we had not really been in danger. The smell of wet leaves and the sharp sweetness of apples felt pleasant, normal, until a fox started across the road and all of us leaned toward the windows at once, startled. No one said the obvious thing, but the orchard did not feel entirely like an orchard, like when a group feels like a group, until one person stops breathing. The farm stand was a postcard of friendliness. 2 middle-aged workers moved with the practiced economy of people who had spent decades among fruit. Wrinkled smiles, a rehearsed "have a good one," the suggestion that we try a cider donut. Even so, their eyes never lingered on the western edge of the property. When Maya asked about a trail that dipped down into the trees, one of the women half shrugged and cast a glance toward the town. "That side is private," she said. "We don't go out there much." Then she went back to folding the paper bags as if the subject could be smoothed flat by hand. We rented a wooden wagon and went for a walk. The day had that quality that in photographs looks like a fable. Diffused light, droplets on the leaves like tiny lenses, rows of trees leaning as if they were listening. I tried to focus on apertures and framing, on how the light brought out the ridges in the skin of a Honeycrisp apple, on the pattern of decay in a fence made of split boards. The camera felt like a tether, something mechanical and reliable that reminded my hands how to make something beautiful. And still, every so often, when my chest felt hollow, I noticed branches trembling though there was no wind. An animal's sound would cut off abruptly, and the air smelled faintly metallic, like coins rubbed between thumb and finger. "You okay?" Ben asked when I lagged behind to take a few more photos. "Fine," I said. My voice came out too steady. "Just looking at things." "You're always looking at things," Maya laughed. But even her laugh carried a brittle edge. I felt it. We heard about the pumpkin from some tourists coming back from a hayride. "Huge, like a bathtub," they said near the tree line, beside a fence held together by nostalgia and nails. I offered to go see it because I liked the idea of proving to myself that I could handle small, deliberate risks. Short walks, not cliffs. Close to people, not far away. The trail sloped away from the rows and into trees that swallowed sound. The birdsong thinned until the world felt like a photograph missing one color. The path was covered with damp leaves, silent underfoot. Then I saw the shape, a figure between two maple trees at the end of the row, tall and too thin, draped in pale fabric that blended into the mist. For a moment I thought it was a scarecrow dressed in some blind man's sweater, but there was something about the posture that was meticulous, as if someone had arranged it with deliberate aesthetics. My camera found it before my mind did. I framed it, zoomed in until the texture filled the viewfinder. Fabric that should not have looked so smooth, seams where they should not exist. Too many fingers, or maybe fingers that were just too long, moving with a reflexive twitch. There was the pumpkin, half buried at its feet, absurdly domestic. I stepped a little closer, pretending not to care, and the performance felt false. "Hey," I shouted back. My voice sounded like a note made of crumpled paper. "I found the pumpkin. Come look." When I turned toward the row I had come from, the orchard felt shifted, displaced. Somewhere behind us a branch snapped, dry and sharp like a bone breaking. I whipped my head around. The figure was farther down the row now, closer. Everything about it looked unreadable and intentional. Curtis's voice floated from a distance, worried. "You okay, Jamie?" "Yeah," I lied, but my heart was hitting me like a fist. The figure tilted its head as if it were listening, and for 1 second I thought it was studying the way I walked. We tried to laugh it off, to be brave, as we headed back with the wagon, the wooden wheels creaking, white breath showing in the fading light. I told the story with the humor of a child who had done something stupid and survived. The others laughed too, but cautiously, nervously. When we got back to the stand, the figure had moved again. It was standing at the edge where the orchard soil met the gravel road, as if respecting a doorway. It did not cross. It did not stoop to pick up an apple. It only watched, an elegant geometry of threat. One of the workers stiffened when she saw it. She muttered something under her breath and then hurried us toward the car with an efficiency that felt more like protection than urgency. "It came back early this year," she said, and then with the forced brightness of someone who needs to keep both a job and a spine. "You'd better go now. It gets dark fast." We got into Curtis's car like people being pushed out of a fairy tale. The drive back was frantic and quiet. We all talked at once, trying to stitch normalcy over the ride. "It's probably some kid," Ben suggested. "An art project. Or a scarecrow," Maya offered. But none of those words landed with conviction. On the highway, I turned and saw it in the rear window. It stood in the row, and the row swallowed it the way a stage swallows props. It tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, until it aligned with our gaze, if you can call it a gaze, and something at the base of my neck rooted itself exactly where fear used to live. It did not run after us. It did not scream. It only registered us. and watched as if marking off a point on a list. That night I went down a rabbit hole of local forum threads. People talked about the Ferglin Watcher, about sightings going back decades. Some posts were old campfire legends. Others had the brittle edge of people torn out of sleep at 3 a.m. Don't go past West Row at dusk. One comment said, watch and learn. I threw my phone onto the nightstand and stayed awake listening. At 2 a.m. I thought I heard a slow, dry crunch outside my apartment. The sound of leaves being stepped on with intention, as if someone knew how to take the smallest step. That made the biggest noise. I told myself it was a cat or the neighbor. I told myself many things. The photos became corrupted when I tried to upload them for class. The file showed up as damaged except for one. It was blurry, just a smear of leaves in my hand. But in the center, there were two pale points catching light the wrong way, like fish eyes seen through film. I printed it anyway and mounted it on poster board. More of a talisman than evidence. Professor Nuon asked me if I wanted to repeat the session. No, I told her. I think I already got what I needed. She looked at me for a long moment and then nodded. Maybe because she suspected the assignment had become about more than composition. We never went back to Ferglin. We decided at the same time, the way several people close a door in one motion. Not out of cowardice, but because some thresholds are more than topography. Time has a strange way of deciding what becomes a story and what stays a wound. For months, every time the wind picked up and leaves skittered across the asphalt like whispered gossip, I felt my pulse catch. On bad nights, I left my camera by the window, as if light could protect it, and by extension, protect me. Once, coming home late from a night class, I took a side road that passed near where Ferglin would have been if the fog had been lighter and the moon more generous. I slowed down without thinking, right where the fence used to be. Not out of curiosity, but because that road had become a line I respected. A truck with one headlight out passed me. The driver, oblivious. The world folds itself around ordinary people. Drivers, nights, jobs. Whatever watched from the orchard belonged to another geometry. One that does not fit inside ordinary maps. I thought about the workers and how their eyes never lingered on the western edge. I thought about how we tell ourselves to be brave, and how sometimes bravery means not inviting trouble. Panic still visits me sometimes, but now I treat it like weather. I notice it, button my coat, and keep walking through it. I still carry my camera, the thing that taught me how to look when I wanted to look away. On the worst nights when leaves scrape against the glass like nails, I set the camera on the sill and point it outward. Not because I expect proof, but because making an image is how I keep my hands steady. The world feels less like a set of traps when you have one small job to do. Fear always points to the places where we have been hurt. But boundaries matter. Some are physical, others are learned. There is courage not only in walking toward the unknown, but in knowing when turning back is the wisest and bravest move. Protect what you can. Remember what you must. And let the past teach you how to travel the road without letting it drive for you. Story 6. I took the overnight shift at Clear Pine Ridge Cabins because I needed a place that would let me sleep when I could, and stay quiet when I couldn't. Seattle had chewed me up and spit me out. Brutally long days at a design studio, a girlfriend who left in the middle of an argument, and a sleep schedule that felt more like punishment than rest. The cabins were supposed to be a break, a small worn desk, an old radio that hissed with distant stations, and nights so empty the pines sounded like a cluster of conversations far away. I kept telling myself I would be able to breathe again there. At first, the job was slow and easy. Most nights I checked people in, handed out keys, and made coffee for the guests leaving early. The guests were tired, polite. Almost all of them were the kind of people who wanted to feel like they were getting away, not like they were creating headlines. I liked the routine, the notes in the guest log, the smell of wood smoke, the way the winter stars seemed honest. Then that year, the storms came early. the kind that makes you wonder whether the generator is a just-in-case backup or an absolute necessity. The wind the night everything changed was slamming the siding like a fist. The lights in the main office flickered even though I had checked the generator 2 hours earlier. I was cross-checking guest records when something hit the window. A flat, wet thud, nothing like a falling branch. I went outside with a flashlight and found a man half buried in the drifts, his face pale, sweating as if he had run a marathon and then been thrown into the snow. He grabbed my jacket and managed to say only one sentence between ragged breaths. "Cabin 5. They need help." His hands were shaking so hard I could feel the tremor through his grip. I dragged him inside, settled him near the heater, and called 911. Even with the lines probably jammed by the storm, the operator told me, "Help may be delayed." It was one of those sentences that stays in the room like a clock that suddenly sounds louder. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and the emergency kit and headed toward Cabin 5. On the way, the wind swallowed the radio signal and left me with nothing but static in my ears. My boots made deep, heavy prints, one deliberate trail cutting across the white. The cabin door was partly open. Inside, 4 people were curled up on the floor or slumped against the furniture, groaning with dark lips and sweaty skin coated with an oily sheen. The place smelled like bile and something chemical. One woman tried to speak and collapsed again. There were jars and plates scattered across the table and counters, the leftovers of a reunion weekend. On one of the surfaces sat a mason jar with a label. It read, "No one else try this." And across it, the ink had been crossed out. The handwriting looked shaky, as if the person who wrote it had doubted their own warning. The paramedics arrived slowly, but they arrived, and they worked the way they do in training videos. Methodical, calm, efficient. They stabilized the victims and loaded them into ambulances once the roads cleared enough for them to get out. In the middle of the chaos, I answered questions I did not feel prepared to answer. The victims had been poisoned, an emergency medical technician told me, with multiple compounds. Later, lab reports found a common rat poison, but also an additive that did not match anything in the toxicology index at first glance. That made it all feel less like an accident and more like a plan. The detectives discovered that the landline to Cabin 5 had been deliberately cut hours before I arrived. They also traced a car someone had seen leaving the parking area to Meredith Walker, the organizer of the gathering. Meredith's apartment matched the rumors in a quiet way. Library assistant, quiet, unremarkable. Her car turned up abandoned near a Forest Service road. There were boot prints leading into the pines until the trail disappeared. Later, someone pulled footage from a gas station off the highway. Meredith had been there at dusk, hands resting on the counter, buying eggs. Another person remembered seeing her leave the cabins earlier that same day with a cooler. No one remembered seeing her return. What felt strangest to me was how small the violence seemed once the adrenaline wore off. It had something domestic about it. The mason jars like household props. The crossed-out warning like a wrinkled scrap of paper, a plate left untouched. Some nights I repeated that handwritten label in my head like it was a riddle. Someone wanted to warn them, and then erased the warning. Why? Who ends up tasting it last? The detective suggested motives, jealousy, an argument that had simmered for years, maybe even a mental break. But nothing he said filled the hole that question opened in the center of the story. They closed Meredith's case when they failed to find her. No one wanted to call her a fugitive. No one wanted to call it a deliberate disappearance. Instead, the story slipped into that category of unsolved things people in small towns talk about at gas stations, and then decide to leave alone. To me, the cabin never felt like crime scene, and then clean space. It felt like a room that remembered what had happened, like a bruise that would not fully fade. I scrubbed the floor until my hands went numb, and the smell never really left the boards. 2 weeks after the incident, the staff found the patio door of Cabin 5 standing open over fresh snowfall. There was a single set of boot prints coming from the tree line to the porch, and stopping there. No return prints. We stood there staring at it the way someone stands in a house and suddenly understands there might still be someone inside. I remember the wind dragging the snow like sifted flour in those perfect, clean, unreadable tracks, as if someone wanted to be found. After that, the ridge felt different. The pines kept their own kind of silence, and the desk radio sounded thinner at night, stations fading in and out like fingers running across piano keys. I started fearing the overnight shift in a new way. Where I used to greet the emptiness with relief, now I looked at it with suspicion. I stopped taking the long way home and checked the locks twice. I carried the emergency kit like a talisman. Sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning, the wind would shift and the snow would settle into lines that looked like a single fresh set of prints heading toward the cabins. I would stand by the window watching until the world tilted back toward the normal. And then a shadow would move, and I would not sleep the rest of the night. My nightmares were less graphic than reality. They were made of small images stitched together. The jar with the crossed-out label, Meredith's boots vanishing into the woods, the cold slate-colored eyes of someone who had chosen to step out of the ordinary and into something else. Months passed. The victims recovered physically, but not entirely. The nightmares, the aversion to certain flavors, and a kind of mistrust clung to them like a souvenir from winter. I went back to graphic work through freelance projects, a sign that the world kept moving. But I stopped romanticizing the cold. I started treating silence with suspicion and routine with gratitude. The storm gave me space to think, and in the spaces it left behind, I learned how fragile the line is between everyday kindness and something that looks like care but ends in something completely different. Violence often arrives wrapped in the language of the ordinary. Shared meals, quiet errands, a favor from a friend, and that makes it harder to see coming. Pay attention to the small signs. Listen when something feels wrong and act on that discomfort. Protecting other people sometimes means trusting that your unease makes sense and not waiting for proof that may never come. Story 7. If you grow up in a place like Grey Rock, you learn to make your own fun. The best bars in town close early. The movie theater plays the same 3 films on rotation, and summer work shifts end before the sun goes down. So when you are 19 and restlessness is chewing at you from the inside, abandoned places start to look like invitations. It was me, Connor, Noah, and the twins, Lily and Mara. We had been bored in that particular way since sophomore year. We had explored old mines, climbed shaky silos, and snuck into motel pools at 2 o'clock in the morning. Almost all of it felt like currency, a story to trade, a burst of adrenaline that helped you survive labs and library shifts. We were careful, more or less. We learned which fences existed for people to complain about and which ones were just decorative. But the previous summer, Connor sprained his ankle at the water tower. Yes, that one. We swore we would be smarter. That lasted until one night in late August, when the gray sky, a dare, and too much cheap gas station coffee convinced us that the Grey Rock train depot would be different. Lonely ruined places have a way of feeling like secrets, and that depot was the brightest secret in town, the kind of thing you want to touch and then tell no one about. We parked half a mile down the service road and walked in under a half-hearted sun. The depot crouched there like an old animal. Dark windows, paint peeling like sunburned skin. The tracks curved and disappeared into pine and sage like abandoned veins. Locals like to tell the story of a wandering woman who used to scream at night. But in our town, rumors were about as reliable as lightning. Loud, dramatic, and almost always seasonal. Our plan was simple. Take pictures, make jokes, and do not be idiots. We thought the past was a manual we had already read. The trouble, though, started announcing itself early. Connor, who had always been the clumsy one, caught his ankle on a hidden route and swore without losing his grin. Lily's flashlight flickered like it was spending its last few seconds, and that made her visibly nervous. Mara kept pointing at telegraph poles, saying she had seen someone slip behind one. But whenever we turned, there was nothing. The wind smelled like dust and old metal, and even the sky seemed to be holding its breath. Inside, the depot was colder than it had any right to be. The ticket counter leaned like a drunk. The chairs were skeletons, and the clock had stopped at an hour that felt centuries old. We joked, "Ghost tour. We need a Groupon." Until we stopped joking. That was when Mara found the jacket. It was draped over a chair, as if someone had left it there in order to forget it. Denim heavy, covered in dust, with that look of old skin. But on the back were finger marks, smudges, drag streaks, as if someone had gripped the fabric hard, and then that hand had been pulled away. And then that sound started. A slow scraping down the hallway, like metal on wood that had first gotten wet and then dried out. It was not the sound of a raccoon or a branch. It had weight. Noah called out, "Hello?" Because shouting hello feels braver when other people are standing nearby. The answer was a long, rough exhale, like an animal trying to speak in human. We froze. Lily's laugh came out brittle and died in her throat. When the silhouette entered our line of sight, it did not exactly walk. It negotiated space. It moved in jerks and jumps, in broken spasms like a bad film. It was tall and thin, with limbs too long for someone who had once been a person. Its head tilted at an angle that turned my stomach, as if its neck were a hinge stuck halfway through a turn. It was carrying something long and metallic. At first I thought it was a shovel, but when it moved into the flashlight beam it became clear. It was a dented railroad lantern, the kind you only see in sepia photographs. Connor grabbed my sleeve so hard I could feel his fingers through the fabric. "That thing is not standing the way it should," he whispered. And he was right. Its posture was wrong in a way that made me want to blink to reset my vision. The figure jerked and dragged the lantern across the floorboards. The scraping filled the place, slow, deliberate, as if someone were drawing a line and refusing to finish it. The twins mouthed my name without voice, their lips moving as if they expected me to get them out of there through sheer will. And then we ran. The uncontrolled panic of a group of kids who had been fine 30 seconds earlier is ugly to remember. Stumbling, grabbing, breaths too sharp to catch. Connor fell twice because his ankle, still tender from the water tower, failed under the weight of fear. Lily and Mara hauled him up, and panic did the heavy lifting. Every time Mara's flashlight managed to flicker back on, the figure had changed places. Once it was by the ticket wall, another time in the doorway, another time it was inside behind us, its outline bending in unnatural ways, as if its joints were too loose to be human. Outside, the world exhaled. The sage moved like grass in a field, indifferent. The depot platform looked like a mouth that had swallowed us and then spit us back out, taking some of the color from the sky with it. We did not stop until the chain-link fence by the road flashed back at us, and only when we reached it did the sound stop. We turned at the same time, our breath rolling like shared fog, and saw the silhouette at the edge of the platform. Lantern hanging low, head tilted, watching us as if it had been waiting for the right moment to mark us on a list it carried inside itself. Then it stepped backward, sank into the darkness, and disappeared into the depot. We did not go back. We walked a very long stretch home, our feet moving too fast over memory. And when we finally calmed down enough to type in the group chat that night, the messages were short. No adults. No sheriff. We did not tell anyone because we knew what was coming. Lectures, punishments. Our parents' faces folding into that same tired concern we had spent years trying to dodge, even if only for a while. Pride is stupidity when your chest is tight with fear. 2 weeks later, my cousin Taylor, the surveyor who loves old maps, mentioned the depot the way someone mentions the weather. Did you know the station master who disappeared in 31? People still say he checks the platform. At the time, it sounded like just another story, with its teeth tucked inside the rumor. But later, the twins' cousin pulled out an old newspaper clipping with a photo of the depot and a thin-faced man holding a lantern. The caption read, "Station Master Thomas Gray, missing, last seen after dark." The lantern in the image looked like the one burned into my head. We never went back. Not because we had matured, but because there was a line in that depot we were not willing to cross again. Summer kept thinning out until it became classes and lab reports, and the boldness that used to carry us onto porches and into old barns folded itself into essays and group projects. Even so, on those late end-of-summer nights, when the wind combs through the sage like a hand-combing hair, I sometimes hear a sound in the distance that makes my pulse kick in my throat. Metal on wood, slow and deliberate, like a lantern scraping across the floor in a building that no longer has trains. Sometimes I wake up thinking about the jacket with the finger marks, and the fact that the figure never crossed the platform. Maybe it was tied to the place, chained to a ritual of checking for passengers who never came. Maybe it was the town's grief given shape. Whatever it was, it left a mark on us. It did not take our bodies, only that easy belief that we were untouchable. That kind of theft is quiet but constant. You do not realize it until something small, like a creak in the dark, tightens your chest. Now we tell the story in different voices as the years pass, each of us careful with the details. Sometimes the twins stare at the tracks and whisper about how the lantern must have looked when it tilted. Connor laughs in that nervous high way he has when remembering how his ankle betrayed him at the worst possible moment. I wonder whether we should have told an adult, but I also know that kids live by a particular kind of truth, both foolish and pure, that there are places that need to be touched and then left alone. And that fear sometimes is the only map you get. Curiosity matters, yes, but knowing where your limit is wisdom. There are places that carry stories capable of turning the curious into the cautious. Respect those edges and listen when the world feels wrong. Protect your friendships and your body by choosing which risks are truly worth the stories they leave behind.